The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk, the Bronx's flagship television talk show. Phones are open tonight, as always, and we welcome your call at 718-960-7241. You can also email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Well, tonight's guest is the co-author of a city council bill that wants to require that developments that benefit from public funding support pay a so-called living wage to employees. We'll ask him about that tonight. We'll also talk about land use issues, politics, and much more. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk council member in the 11th City Council District in the North Bronx, G. Oliver Capel. Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Gary. It's always a pleasure to join you.
Let's start with that living wage bill.
Right.
Clearly a descendant of the Kingsbridge Armory fight.
No doubt.
What's the idea here?
Well, the idea did emerge out of the Kingsbridge Armory fight because in the Kingsbridge Armory fight, as you call it, the argument was over what kind of jobs would be created by a project that derived significant public assistance. And many people in the Bronx felt that public dollars should not be spent on a project that produced mostly jobs that really couldn't sustain a family, couldn't even sustain a two-earner family. And so the idea emerged that the Kingsbridge Armory project should only be supported if the developer promised to pay at least a living wage, not a munificent wage, not even what's called a prevailing wage, which is union scale, but $10 an hour with benefits, health benefits, or $11.50 without health benefits. Hardly a royal wage. You think about it, it comes out to less than $20,000 a year. I don't know how anybody can, frankly, live on that. But we couldn't get the developer to agree to do it. We couldn't get the city to really work with us to come up with a program so that living wages could be offered. And one of the arguments that was made, and I was in the middle of this fight, because I really wanted to see the Armory developed, and I was very, very disappointed that it didn't. But one of the arguments made was, you can't do this on a project-by-project basis. If it becomes a citywide rule where subsidies are involved, that's understandable. And by the way, Gary, this is not a unique idea. Many cities across the country have one form or another of living wage. Pittsburgh has it. Los Angeles has it. A whole series of smaller cities, even some communities in Westchester have it. Baltimore has it. So this is something that we really think is realistic and makes sense. We're not going to overburden these projects, but we are going to provide this certain base level of financial well-being to the people who work there.
The mayor basically scoffed at it, said it was not realistic. EDC comes out and says, well, you know, it's not realistic. Is there an economic reality that this is ignoring in that businesses will say, you know what, why do business with the Bronx or in the city of New York? I can go build something in the suburbs or Westchester, New Jersey, or anywhere else and not have to pay that wage.
Well, you know, New York is a great market. And people are not going to ignore the New York market. I mean, for instance, we built a Target store just near here recently. It's a tremendous success, one of the best Target stores in terms of sales per square foot in the whole country. I am pleased to tell you that finally we're going to be developing the mall or the store, the department store along 230th Street and Broadway. It's going to be Kohl's, another big retailer. We understand that even Walmart, which has been sort of shut out of New York, but they look like they want to come into New York. We have BJ's. We have that whole new development down by the Yankee Stadium, which looks to me to be pretty close to fully rented.
Although none of those were built on this bill.
No. But what I'm saying is that the market is such that people are going to want to come to this market. And these shopping centers, they're more attractive than most locations. And so I believe, look, we're not going, as I said before, we're not asking for royal wages here. We're asking for slightly above the minimum wage.
This doesn't break the bank of those people building those things.
Look, all I can tell you is this is the rule in many communities around the country, and we haven't seen that development has been stymied.
Let me play devil's advocate on the other side then. $10, you say it's not a munificent wage.
No.
$11.50 is also not very large. Is this really a living wage? I mean,
well,
it's better than $7.50.
That's
we
right.
realize
it's
that.
Better than $7.50. And look, we wish we could do more, but at least this is a step in the right direction. And this is what people who've observed the situation believe is realistic. Look, we're working on this legislation. We've introduced it, but we're working on it. And it has a certain amount of flexibility. We'll see as we move along. We're going to be having hearings. Speakers promised us we're going to have hearings, and we're going to explore it. There may be some exceptions that we want to build in. For instance, affordable housing. Real problem, if it costs too much to build affordable housing, it's not affordable anymore. So we have certain exceptions built into the bill.
Your colleagues in the city council, aside from the Bronx delegation, have you heard from any of them saying they support?
Oh yes, we have 24 sponsors at this point, which is just under half. 26 would be a majority. We need more than a majority because we have to try and be sure that even if the mayor vetoes it, we can pass it anyway. Mm-hmm. But I'm very hopeful that the mayor will be convinced. And by the way, there's one good thing that I believe the mayor is doing, because I think it'll work out well. There's a study being done by the mayor, by the EDC, to look at some of these proposals and see how realistic they are. Mm-hmm. And I think they're going to find that they are realistic.
Next topic I want to talk about is that that controversy, which we didn't get to talk about yet on this show anyway, about locating supportive housing, this facility on Cannon Place. And I thought even before discussing the merits, I thought it was curious that you had backed the plan before it really was even determined to be viable, because it turns out it wasn't even a viable plan.
But we don't know that. We don't know that yet.
Although they did back off.
Well, they backed off in part at my suggestion. And I had been talking to the people who were going to develop the site, and I talked to the HPD people. That is not necessarily a project that has been abandoned. It has been delayed in part because the group that was developing the project, developing two other projects, and HPD felt they have to move ahead first on the other projects before they get involved here. And also we have to look at the costs. But the problem is that the HPD was looking to see whether the community would support the project before all the details were available. And I wasn't going to turn it down just on the basis of sort of NIMBY kind of pressures.
Well, it certainly seemed that the constituents in that area did not support
it. But the constituents nowhere are going to be initially enthusiastic. You're not going to find that.
Would you still advocate or support a project that was built in that location? A similar sort of project?
Yes. Look, the organization that was building the project, I believe, was a responsible organization. I went to see a building that they've run, a supportive housing unit they've run in Manhattan on 46th Street for many, many years. It's a perfectly suitable, appropriate, and well-run project. They have another project in Harlem that they run, so that I would support it if, in fact, it can be done at a reasonable cost. And we're not talking about, they had even agreed to reduce the number of units, because one of the problems initially was that it was a bigger building than the neighborhood probably would support. They had agreed to reduce the number. I think the units came down to about 48 units, something like that. And if the price was reasonable, I would support it. Yes.
Many people said, Oliver Capel is from Riverdale. He would never do this in Riverdale.
Not true.
Although, it's been documented in 1991 when the Dinkins administration proposed a facility in Riverdale that you were vehemently against.
But that was a different kind of facility. That was a homeless shelter. This is not a homeless shelter. This was the Cannon Place residence is a residence for some formerly homeless people, but it's permanent housing. It's not a shelter where people come and stay a few nights and then they're supposed to go to some other permanent housing. This is a much more stable situation. I don't favor a homeless shelter in Riverdale, but a supportive housing facility. Look, let's face it.
You would support that in Riverdale?
Yes, absolutely. If it was appropriate size and run by an appropriate organization, absolutely. Look, not to say that it's a great facility, but we have the Riverdale Manor down on Broadway, which is just adjacent to part of Riverdale, where we have 200 people who require support. It's a kind of supportive housing residence for people who have some mental issues and some socialization issues. It's too big. It's not the most attractive place in the world. It's been there for decades. It hasn't done anything. It's not what I call a wonderful facility.
It's none
but
too
it has
pretty in front
no,
of
but
that,
it hasn't.
that area.
It hasn't ruined Riverdale.
Although, well, because that's on Broadway. I mean, that's a lot different than putting it on Cannon Place, right next door to people's private homes.
Well, all I can tell you is that
I don't
we
know
have
if that's
support.
equivalent.
We have supportive residences all over the city, and if they're done by a responsible organization in an appropriate way, if they're not too large, and they're supervised, they should not have an adverse effect on the neighborhood. We've had big fights in Riverdale, by the way, of different kinds of supportive housing for disabled people of various sorts, mentally disabled, physically disabled, strong opposition. In most instances, in almost every instance, I've supported those. Not a single problem over 30 years. Not a single problem, and you should have seen the large outpouring of opposition when those were originally proposed.
In the Land Use Committee, as I understand, there was a meeting tonight about potentially landmarking that area. Would you support landmarking that area, which could preclude them being able to put a facility like that?
I would support landmarking the area, but not if it precludes. I'm not going to use landmarking as a way of trying to exclude appropriate facilities.
Isn't that one of the benefits for any community to landmark a community?
No, absolutely not.
I mean, that's one of the things is you landmark a community so it can preserve the natural...
You can landmark a community that includes...
Such as Fieldston, for instance.
Well, yeah, but Fieldston is all single and two-family homes, but you could landmark a community that includes a supportive housing facility. Landmarking doesn't mean you can't build anything. It means it's to preserve buildings in the area that are of a particular type, and then if the whole community is landmarked, if you build there, you have to build in a way that's consistent with the landmark properties. But landmarking doesn't necessarily exclude a particular facility.
Would you continue to work with the community groups to align the project in a way that they might consider?
Absolutely. Already the project, in terms of the conception of the sponsors, was reduced in size. There was also a proposal to have a number of units that would be for people, not necessarily affluent people, but for regular working people, so there wouldn't all be supportive housing.
Another aspect of this, and I'm glad that you're here to talk about this, because we both live in the Northwest Bronx, so I hear and talk to a lot of different people. People had said that Councilmember Capel is using this as a litmus test when he interviewed community board members, that if they wouldn't support this project, then he wouldn't support them for the community board. Is that a proper way to handle community board appointments?
Let me say, first of all, that I didn't create a litmus test, but I wanted to know people's attitudes, and I wanted to feel that people were not just going to turn their backs on needed facilities in a non-rational way. Just say, no, not NIMBY, not in my backyard, we're not going to accept any burdens. I didn't want to have people of that sort. I think it's perfectly appropriate when I appoint some of the community board that I feel comfortable with their attitude toward the community, toward what ought to be happening in the community, what ought not be happening in the community, what kind of development they would support, what kind of development they would oppose. It's perfectly appropriate. Mm-hmm. And I did discuss with people, because this was an issue at the time, I discussed their attitude. Mm-hmm. I didn't say to them that if they didn't support a particular facility, I wouldn't appoint them. No, never said that.
Which brings us to the news that was in the Riverdale Press about the Tony Casino who ran against you, and he was not, and many of the people who supposedly supported him in the election against you also was not appointed to the community board.
Brad Treback, one
Brad
person.
Treback, and I think there were some others. is this, again, it certainly has the appearance of political payback. Is this appropriate?
Well, first of all, Tony Casino was not. I have certain nominations, a certain number, 17 nominations to Community Board 8. Tony Casino was never my nominee, so I didn't. It didn't come to me to nominate him. He didn't come to me to ask for my nomination. I didn't give it to him. It was the borough president's decision not to reappoint him. Brad Trebeck, I believe, was the nominee of Maria Baez. She's no longer the council person. I understand that Fernando Cabrera didn't renominate him. So each situation has to be taken individually and on its
It certainly has the appearance, though, of political payback. And here's a community board member who, certainly from his community board work, and certainly I disagreed with him on a number of issues. Certainly you did, because you ran against him, or he ran against you. But it would seem he was a good community board member. And
look, it's always good to have some turnover on the community board and bring in new people. I'm very proud of the people who I nominated, a number of them being new members of the community board who haven't served before. I think five new people that I particularly sponsored who are going to be on the community board.
Let's go to the telephones. Who's called in tonight? So far, we have our friend Mark from Pelham Parkway called in. Hello, Mark. How are you? Do we have Mark?
Yeah, you got me.
Hey,
hello. Hey, Gary.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Councilman.
Hi.
And I'm finding this conversation very interesting. I just finished watching Lie to Me, and now I'm watching the repeat of Lie to Me. Oliver, you are probably one of the worst council people I've ever seen. I'm sorry, Gary. I call it blunt and as I see it.
Well, what?
When people have had the chance, when Bloomberg was saying how private entities should stay out of city business and when they want to build business, and yet when this real estate company came in and did the Gateway Mall down here near Yankee Stadium, where it was co-financed with public money, you guys were pretty quiet, especially you. You're very quiet in a lot of cases. Yet we have to pay for parking there, and if there's a Yankee game, you can't even shop there. Almost everybody I know that has a car still will not go to Gateway Mall. The only people I know who are going toGateway Mall are people who live in the area because they
Mark,
can walk there.
Mark, summarize what you...
Let me just say something. I figured out how we can save money in the city. If $10 an hour or $11 an hour is a living wage, I think we should pay all the council people $10 an hour or $11 an hour,
Mark,
and see if they go for that.
So, Mark, let me just summarize what it is that you're contending. I know the councilman has been around. Wait, let me finish my question. The councilman has been around long enough to know that not everybody will agree with what he says and does. But so you're saying that he should not have supported the Gateway Mall project. That's number one.
No, I'm not saying that at all. But I think when they come out and say these things and do these things, they sit there and he sort of falls asleep at the wheel. He's falling asleep at the wheel now. But here goes interesting facts.
So wait. No, Mark, you got to listen here. So is your other contention that 10 and 1150, which is a question I raised, is not sufficient amount of money to fight for? That would be a legitimate question.
Nowhere near. I think if you're going to fight for something that's a decent living wage, I think it should be a minimum of $15 an hour, because that's what people make.
Okay.
Because when you look at council people, state senators, and assembly people, they're considered part-time employees. Oliver, if I'm correct, is an attorney, and I'm sure he's practicing law on the side.
Okay, got it.
My other thing is, hold it, Gary.
Say it quick, and then we're going to give
when they started building in Van Cortlandt Park the filtration plant, Oliver, after they lost and they built the filtration plant, Oliver said he was going to monitor and make sure, because I saw him at a judicial delegate hearing in 2004.
Just say your
Oliver
question.
said he was going to make sure that Bronxites get good-paying jobs.
Okay.
How many people, Oliver, are getting from the Bronx those big-paying jobs?
Got it. Mark, thank you.
in?
Jane, we'll have to cut him off.
Okay, look, there's a whole bunch of things. First of all, I didn't negotiate the terms of the Gateway Mall, and I'm not happy that they charge for parking, but the fact is that there was a deal made between the city and between Related, which is the developer. It included the ability for Gateway to pay for parking. Apparently, they asked the merchants, do they want to have a free parking where they would give a coupon, at some places. merchants give a ticket and then you don't have to pay, but the merchants didn't want to do that. They didn't want to bear that cost, so they do charge for parking, and it's unfortunate, but I had nothing to do with that. I happen to think that the Gateway Mall is a wonderful development for the Bronx. I'm very pleased. What you had there before was a disgrace. The old Bronx Terminal Market was broken down. It was a haven for prostitution and for derelicts and everything else. That Gateway Mall is a tremendous addition to the Bronx. If I can take credit for it, which probably I can't because I wasn't in the middle of that, but I'm happy to take credit for it because it's a wonderful development. That's number one. Number two, the criticism of the living wage proposal is not that it's too little, but it's too much. The people who are opposed to it say you're going to not attract development because people will be deterred because they're going to have to pay. The merchants will not rent there because they're going to have to pay too high. So I'd love it to be $15 an hour. Why not? As far as salaries of public officials are concerned, sure, we earn more than minimum wage, but we don't earn as much in our public jobs as a heck of a lot of people. A lot of public servants and private people earn a lot more than council people do or state legislators who earn considerably less. Complaining about the salaries of public officials, as far as I'm concerned, is totally unjustified. We all work very hard. We all spend a lot of time at our jobs, and of course we earn more than the minimum wage.
And you still do have your
I
law
do,
practice.
although I must say I do, but most of my colleagues actually do it full time. But it is not by law a full-time job, so I do have a law practice. And by the way, I've run for office now at least 15 times. Every time I've run where I've had opposition, people have said, oh, don't vote for him because he has a separate law job, but I've always been reelected.
Then the final thing he mentioned, and we can talk about a number of the issues that are still related to it because it's still out there, is the filtration plant. His point was that you had said something about that there would be jobs there.
Yes, and we fought very hard for jobs. First of all, I opposed the project. I didn't think that the jobs were worth the project. We should have built it in Westchester. But I am on the Filtration Monitoring Committee. We look at the jobs created, and we push very hard for the DEP to hire more Bronx people for the contracts. We've got about 20% of the people there who are Bronx residents. I made a point over the last months, actually, to try and get assurances that there's real monitoring going on, because we heard stories of people saying they're from the Bronx, but they aren't from the Bronx. We've been told that they're checked, that they check their driver's license, that they check other indicia to make sure they actually live in the Bronx. It's true we only have about 20% Bronx residents working there. But after all, look, we're not talking about some strangers working there from some exotic nation. If they happen to come from other parts of the city, or even, heaven forbid, from New Jersey or Westchester, it's still good jobs for them.
Do you support what the controller, and he was sitting in the chair where you're sitting, said that he wanted to do, and that is reevaluate these community benefit agreements and public benefit agreements so that things like jobs would be scripted and signed to and promised in writing, as opposed to maybe the hearing that Mark was at where they said, oh, we'll give you jobs. And then,
well, there are limitations, both legal and practical limitations. I mean, you've got to hire people for jobs who have the skills to do the jobs.
But then they can't.
And then you have union problems too. You have problems with unions who have members. You can't exclude those members. It's a complicated issue to guarantee a certain number of people jobs. But one of the things that we've insisted on is that there be training programs, that there be apprentice programs. And we've gotten the unions to come along.
But the controller is saying that when you sign an agreement or make these promises, it should be held to it. I mean,
well, absolutely.
And you would support that?
Absolutely. To the extent we can.
To educate people, because we really have talked about this filtration thing since before it was built or being built. There's this idea of a pedestrian bridge that has come up. And it's kind of a unique thing. If you want to talk a little bit about it, it's come up at the FMC meetings.
When the project was first conceived in the 1990s, there's this Croton Aqueduct, and there's access to a trail, and that access was destroyed when they built the Major Deegan Expressway. So one of the things that was kind of promised as part of the deal that created the filtration plant and put it in the Bronx was that a bridge would be constructed. And frankly, the DEP and others have ignored their responsibility, but the Filtration Monitoring Committee brought it up, and in fact, there is a report out there now that has costed it out. We had a report just at our meeting, last meeting about a month ago, and we're trying to push the Bloomberg administration to build that bridge. It's a pedestrian
the value
bridge.
of this would be to kind of bring in another part of, or make accessible another part of Van Cortlandt Park that had never been accessible or not been accessible for years.
For generations, yeah.
And that would be, as I understand it, right by that mobile station on the Major Deegan
That's
Expressway.
the area, yes.
The DEP is talking about putting a ramp up on the southern part of the reservoir. Again, maybe people aren't aware of this. Is it then, and they say that's not related to the filtration plant, but convenient because, hey, we're doing work at the reservoir, why not? They're talking about access to the Jerome Park Reservoir.
Right, that's a big issue.
Do you support the access that
yes,
the community
I
has been asking for?
I support access. I support access. I mean, look, we all are concerned about the possibility of some kind of terrorist act or some other disruption, but I think you could provide access compatible with public safety. And after all, if you think about it, all the reservoirs up in Westchester County are basically unguarded, open, and if someone wanted to put some kind of poisonous substance into the water supply, unfortunately they could do it.
Let's not recommend that.
No, but that's the idea, you see. They have a double fence right across the street here around the reservoir, with the idea that someone could do something, dangerous.
Councilmember,
but the fact is that there is public access, which is not going to be disrupted because those lakes upstate that feed the reservoir are huge.
Councilmember, there's never enough time and always more issues than we have time for. Thank you for your time this evening. And folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future program. Archives of our show are available at blip.tv. Just search for Bronx Talk. Next week, we'll be back with more Bronx Talk. There's always something good to talk about. Monday nights at 9 here on BronxNet, Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios 33. Thanks, of course, to producer Jane Folloro for helping to make it all happen.